I never used to believe in monsters. Back in November 1966, Point Pleasant, West Virginia was nothing more than a sleepy town where the most exciting thing to do as a teenager was drive around, sneak beers, and scare each other with ghost stories. But there was one place we all dared each other to go, the TNT area. An abandoned World War II munitions plant, long since left to rot, with dark corridors, overgrown buildings, and a silence so thick it almost buzzed. They said you could hear footsteps in the dark when no one was there. They said things moved in the shadows. And that night, we found out they were right. It was a cold, clear Friday night. I was in the back seat of my buddy's Chevy Impala. Beside me was Darren, always the loudmouth. Up front, Lisa and Amy clutched each other nervously, while my best friend Rick gripped the wheel like he was trying to squeeze courage out of it. We were 17, stupid, and looking for a thrill. So of course, we drove into the TNT area. There was something wrong the moment we passed the rusted gates. The air changed. It wasn't just colder, it felt heavier, like the trees were watching. Rick turned off the headlights as we crept forward on the gravel path. The only light came from the moon and the occasional flicker of our flashlights bouncing inside the car. We were laughing, pretending we weren't scared. I remember Darren cracked a joke about mutant raccoons, and we all chuckled just to fill the silence. Then the radio fizzled. A sharp burst of static pierced the laughter, high and shrill like a scream underwater. Rick slapped the knob, but the dial spun on its own, wildly jumping from station to station before settling on complete silence. And that's when we saw it. At first, it was just 2 red dots ahead. No, higher than eye level, floating above the ground like embers in the dark. They blinked. Then they moved. Lisa screamed first. The thing stepped into the moonlight. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a bird. It was something in between. Gray and hunched with leathery wings stretching out at least 10 feet, the thing was taller than the car, towering over us with a body like wet concrete. And those eyes, those awful glowing eyes, burning red and locked onto us. Rick cursed and slammed the gas pedal. Gravel spit out behind us as we fishtailed down the path. But it followed. It didn't run, it flew. It soared above the trees, gliding beside us, then over us. Its wings whooshed through the air like sails cutting wind. I turned to look out the back window and nearly screamed again. Those red eyes were right there, staring into mine, only inches away from the glass. Lisa was sobbing. Amy had her face buried in her lap, and Darren was shouting incoherent prayers. The car swerved dangerously on the tight road. I thought we were going to die. I was sure of it. And then, just like that, it was gone. We burst out of the trees and back onto the main road, tires screeching. Rick didn't stop until we were at the gas station near town, all of us pale and shaking. Nobody spoke for a full minute, not even Darren. The local sheriff didn't believe us, said it was an owl or maybe kids pulling a prank. But those weren't owl eyes. They followed me every time I closed mine. I started seeing them at night, in reflections, in dreams, behind windows, even in my rearview mirror. Long after that night, I'd catch a flash of red before my stomach dropped and I'd nearly run off the road. We never went back to the TNT area, none of us. But that thing, whatever it was, never left us. And the scariest part? It wasn't trying to kill us. It was trying to be seen. They say monsters stay in the dark, but what they don't tell you is, sometimes the dark follows you home. It had been 2 weeks since that night in the TNT area, and none of us were the same. Rick barely spoke anymore. Lisa jumped at every sound. Darren started carrying a baseball bat everywhere he went. And me? I kept the curtains closed and my lights on. Always. I tried to forget it. Told myself it was a trick of the light, group hysteria, a giant owl, or some sick joke. But then the neighborhood dogs started disappearing. First was Mr. Penner's German Shepherd, a dog that never left the yard. Then it was the Jacob's Beagle. Then my cat, Lucy. Gone without a trace. No blood, no sound. Just vanished. At night I heard noises on the roof. Slow, deliberate thumps like something pacing. I'd open the door and find nothing but a few broken shingles on the ground, and the twisted smell of ozone in the air. And the trees. The branches outside my bedroom window were too high for a man to reach, but they were cracked, splintered like something heavy had landed on them. One night, I woke up with the strange feeling that someone was in the room. My skin prickled, and my breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window, and saw them. Two glowing red eyes staring straight through the glass. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. The eyes didn't blink. They hovered in the air, unblinking, burning into my skull like twin coals. I finally bolted upright, fumbled for the lamp, and in that split second of darkness before the bulb warmed up, I swear I saw wings. When the light came on, the window was empty. No eyes, no figure, just condensation on the inside of the glass in the shape of a handprint. The next day, I skipped school and rode my bike to the edge of town, desperate for answers. I wasn't the only one scared. The whole town was on edge. People whispered about the creature at church, in grocery store aisles, behind cupped hands. Stories were everywhere. A pair of kids swore they saw something with wings fly over the river at dusk. A woman claimed to see two red lights watching her from the woods while she hung laundry. An old farmer said his cows had stopped eating, standing frozen in place for hours, eyes locked on the tree line. And then one night, someone knocked at our door. It was around 9:30. My parents were asleep. I opened it to find a man standing on the porch in a highway worker's vest, covered in dirt and shaking. His eyes were wild, his voice hoarse like he'd been screaming. I recognized him. He worked on the road crew out near Route 62. He grabbed my arm and hissed, "It's not evil. It warned me." I stared at him, confused, until he told me what happened. He and a coworker had been repairing a guardrail just before dawn, when something huge swooped down from the trees, scattering tools and knocking both men to the ground. He said it didn't attack. It landed between them, just stood there, watching. He couldn't describe the face, only the eyes, glowing like brake lights in fog. He said he felt calm. Then it turned and took off into the woods, wings flapping so hard the leaves lifted. That afternoon, his partner had a heart attack while driving home, crashed into a tree and died instantly. "It came to stop him," the man whispered. "To warn us. We've got it wrong." I closed the door in his face. I wanted it to be over. I wanted it to be a nightmare we'd all wake from. But every time I walked past the trees near our yard, I felt them, watching, breathing. This thing wasn't done with us. And deep down, I knew we weren't done with it either. By December, the air in Point Pleasant had changed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something thicker, heavier. Like the town was holding its breath. People whispered instead of spoke. Stores closed early. Dogs refused to walk near the woods. But what haunted me most wasn't outside. It was the sound. It started subtly. A faint, high-pitched whine behind the usual hum of the TV. Then, one night, when I tried to tell my mom about what I'd seen at the window, the radio on the kitchen counter burst into static so loud it made the dishes rattle. I jumped, and when I looked, the dial had moved, on its own. It now pointed directly to a dead frequency. The pitch of the static was sharp and unnatural, like it was trying to scream but couldn't form the words. I turned it off, but the buzzing stayed in my ears for hours. After that, it became a pattern. Every time someone mentioned the creature, whether in passing or whisper, static followed. Phones went dead mid-conversation. TVs flickered to snow. One night, I was lying in bed when my bedside radio turned on by itself. No station. Just that same shrill whine, like something old and broken trying to tune into our world. It made my nose bleed. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. I was starting to unravel. Desperate for answers, I found myself in the town library the next day, flipping through every book I could find on folklore and West Virginia legends. That's when I met her, Miss Wilma Hastings, the librarian. She'd been there for decades, quiet, kind, with eyes like she'd already seen the end of the world. She noticed the stack of books on my table, Appalachian cryptids, winged creatures, omens, and said softly, "You've seen it, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She sat across from me and opened a thin, leather-bound notebook she kept behind the counter. Inside were news clippings, journal entries, and eerie sketches that looked exactly like what we saw that night in the TNT area, down to the red eyes and massive wingspan. She told me it wasn't just a local myth. The creature had been spotted near other disasters, mine collapses, dam failures, even in Europe before the war. "They call it a harbinger," she whispered. "A shadow that walks just ahead of catastrophe, not to cause it, but to warn." I asked her why it was following me. She said, "Maybe it thinks you're listening." That night, the dreams returned. But they weren't just dreams. They felt real. The red eyes in the dark, the static buzzing in my skull, the feeling of being lifted, weightless, like something had me by the shoulders, pulling me out of bed. I woke up on the floor, cold and shivering, my pillow halfway across the room, and on the inside of my bedroom window, scratched into the condensation, were 3 long marks, like claws, from the inside. The next morning, I tried to tell Rick, but his phone died as soon as I said the word Mothman. It wasn't a coincidence. I was sure of it now. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be talked about. It wanted to be understood, or feared, or maybe heard. I couldn't tell what was worse anymore, the creature itself, or the unraveling of my reality. And somewhere deep inside, I started to wonder, if we didn't listen, what was it warning us about? It happened 2 days before Christmas break. We were supposed to meet at Rick's house, same as always, only he never showed. At first, I thought maybe he just needed space. We'd all been distant since the night in the TNT area, but Rick had seemed off. Not just shaken, obsessed. The last time we spoke, his voice trembled as he told me he'd seen it again. Near the river this time, standing in the fog, wings folded tight like a statue watching the current. He said he didn't run. He said it didn't move. He said it knew him. That was the last thing I ever heard from Rick. The next morning, his mom called in tears. His car was gone, his bed untouched. All they found was the back door hanging open and muddy footprints on the kitchen floor, leading in, not out. The sheriff called in search dogs. Volunteers combed the banks of the Ohio River. The old TNT buildings were swept room by room. But nothing turned up. No body. No signs of struggle. Just silence. And a strange low hum that lingered in the TNT area, like a pressure behind your eyes. Compasses spun wildly inside the old bunkers. Radios died without warning. Even the dogs refused to step beyond a certain point, whimpering and pulling at their leashes. That same night, a woman 3 blocks from my house called the police in hysterics. Her voice shook as she told them her dog had been snatched from the backyard by what she described as a man with wings. She said it moved like it didn't touch the ground, hovering. When the police arrived, they found claw marks on the gate and deep impressions in the grass where something heavy had landed. I barely slept after that, because I kept hearing things too. Whispers in the walls that came and went with the static. Shadows flitting across the edges of mirrors. And those red eyes, they were everywhere now. In reflections, in puddles, in the gleam of passing headlights. They weren't blinking anymore. They were watching. I started sleepwalking. My mom said she found me standing at the front door 3 nights in a row, hand on the knob, eyes wide open, face blank as stone. I had no memory of it. One morning, I woke up with dirt under my fingernails and dried blood on my wrist. I'd clawed a jagged shape into the wooden floor beneath my bed, a rough outline of wings and 2 burning eyes. I stopped trusting my own thoughts. Was I dreaming this? Was something in me? I found a page torn from Rick's sketchbook tucked into the bottom of my school locker. I hadn't touched that locker in weeks. I don't know who put it there. On it was a crude drawing of the creature, larger than life, standing in the middle of the silver bridge. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "It knows what's coming." That's when I knew. Rick didn't run away. He didn't disappear. He was taken, or worse, chosen. And whatever the Mothman was, whatever it was trying to do, this was far from over. It started with a dream. I was standing at the riverbank, cold mud seeping through my shoes, fog curling around my legs like something alive. Ahead of me, the water wasn't moving. It just sat there, black and still, reflecting nothing. Then came the sound. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, steady, like heavy footsteps on wet wood. I turned and saw him. Rick. Pale, soaking wet. He held a notebook to his chest with trembling hands, eyes wide with fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, I heard static. I woke up screaming, soaked in sweat. My clock read 3:13 a.m. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling. So I went to Rick's house, not to the front door, but around back, to the old shed where we used to sneak cigarettes and write dumb song lyrics in spiral notebooks. I don't know what made me look under the floorboard near the far wall. Just instinct, maybe. That's where I found it. A weather-worn, spiral-bound journal. Rick's. The pages were water-damaged, some torn, but what remained chilled me to my core. Page after page of frantic sketches. Wings, eyes, collapsed bridges, shadowy figures with outstretched arms, and words. Desperate, scrawled words. It comes before the fall. 13 steps to the river. The sound is getting louder. Toward the back, the pages began to repeat a countdown. Over and over. 13 days, 12 days, 11, and then 0 equals broken steel. Cold water. No return. I flipped the page and stopped breathing. It was a drawing of the Silver Bridge, half submerged, twisted metal, cars falling, and above it all the Mothman, wings spread wide, staring down like a silent judge. That's when I started looking at the dates. I compared the timeline in Rick's notes to the sightings in the newspaper clippings Miss Hastings had given me. A sick pattern began to form. 13 days before each major local incident, an electrical fire, a child's unexplained disappearance, a mining accident, there were sightings. Red eyes, radio interference, nightmares. And now, the numbers in Rick's notebook aligned perfectly with today. We were 13 days from something. I didn't know what, but it was coming. I ran to Miss Hastings, showed her the journal. Her face went pale as she scanned the pages. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she walked over to a dusty bookshelf and pulled out a cracked, yellowing book titled Wings Before the Storm. Inside were accounts from all over the world. Stories of a winged creature appearing before disasters. Chernobyl, the Black Plague, even London before the Blitz. Different names, same eyes, same silence. They used to call it a banshee, she said. Others called it an angel. Some thought it was death itself. But always, it came to warn, to witness. But why us? I asked. She just looked at me, eyes tired. Maybe because no one else listens anymore. That night I went back to the river. I stood in the same place from my dream. I waited, and it came. I didn't hear it land, but I felt the pressure in the air change. I turned slowly. There it was, not more than 30 feet away, towering, gray, eyes glowing like twin beacons in the fog. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. But something about it had changed. It wasn't threatening. It looked sad. It looked tired. I stepped forward, but it unfurled its wings and vanished in an instant, the wind of its departure nearly knocking me down. As I walked home, the static returned, in my ears, in the air, in my bones. We had 13 days, and if Rick was right, something was about to fall. The 13th day came colder than the rest. The sky above Point Pleasant hung low and heavy, a thick gray blanket smothering the horizon. The air was still, too still, as if the entire town was trapped in the final breath before a scream. I didn't go to school that day. Couldn't. Something in my chest told me I needed to watch, to listen, to be there. The sightings had surged in the last 2 days, neighbors whispering about shadows in the sky, red lights hovering over rooftops, pets whimpering without cause. My own house buzzed with interference. The lights dimmed every time I spoke about the creature, and the radio never played anything but that high-pitched hum now. It had become the background noise of my life, constant, clawing. I returned to the library that morning. Miss Hastings was already waiting, standing by the window with a map pinned to the wall beside her. She'd marked every reported sighting with tiny red pins, and at the center of it all, converging like a spiral, was the Silver Bridge. "We're out of time," she said, without turning. "If there's anything to be done, it has to be today." I don't remember how I got there, whether I drove or walked or simply drifted like a leaf on a current. But by 4 p.m., I stood at the foot of the Silver Bridge. Rush hour traffic was crawling across it. Families, workers, trucks loaded with holiday gifts. It was a typical evening. Normal, ordinary. That's what made it feel so wrong. I stepped onto the walkway, staring at the steel beams above me, trying to listen beyond the noise. That's when I heard it. Not a sound, but a feeling. A pressure in my ears, a tremor beneath my feet, the crackle of static building inside my skull. And then the screaming started. It was sudden, piercing. Tires squealed. A deafening metallic groan echoed through the structure like the cry of some wounded beast. I looked up and watched, paralyzed, as one of the support beams twisted unnaturally, steel snapping like dry twigs. In seconds, the center span of the bridge buckled and dropped. Cars, people, entire sections of the road plunging into the black waters of the Ohio River below. The world became chaos. Horn blasts, shouts, sirens that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I ran to the railing, leaning over as bodies hit the water, as headlights disappeared beneath the surface, as a mother clung to the roof of her sinking car, screaming a name I couldn't hear. The current turned red with taillights and something darker. Then I saw him. Across the river, standing on the opposite bank through the curling smoke and chaos. Unmoving, massive, winged, red eyes glowing like warning lights through the mist. He stood perfectly still, watching, not fleeing, not attacking, just witnessing. I locked eyes with the creature, and in that moment, I understood. It wasn't death. It was the shadow of it. A sentinel. A sorrowful herald of things already set in motion. Like thunder following lightning. Too late to stop the storm. And then he was gone. One gust of wind, a burst of static in the air, and the bank was empty. The Mothman had vanished, leaving only the rising wail of sirens and the metallic sob of twisted steel behind him. 46 people died that day. Some were never recovered. Some were pulled from the river hours later, days later, frozen in wide-eyed terror. The town fell into shock. Families broke. Children were orphaned. Holidays were canceled. And through it all, no one saw the creature again. Not that day. Not ever again in Point Pleasant. But I knew the truth. He hadn't come to destroy. He had come to warn. And we were too blind to listen. The silence after the collapse was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It settled over Point Pleasant like a fog no sun could burn off. 46 gone. The bridge lay twisted in the river's grip like a skeleton stripped bare. The news crews came, then the National Guard. Divers combed the muddy depths. Families stood at the edge of the banks for hours, waiting for names, for answers, for something. But no one said the name out loud. Not in front of cameras, not in interviews, not in church pews or town halls, not Mothman. They called it tragedy. Structural failure, flawed eyebar, metal fatigue. But I knew better. We all did. After the bridge fell, the sightings stopped. No red eyes in the trees, no whispers in the radio static. The air changed, like whatever weight had been pressing down on our town had finally lifted. And yet, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like abandonment. Like something ancient had passed through, left its mark, and moved on. Rick was never found. His mother stopped opening her blinds. Lisa and Darren moved away by spring. Miss Hastings retired suddenly. Her house sat empty, the windows dark, the library locked for weeks. When it reopened, all her journals, clippings, everything were gone. No records, no explanations, just dust on the shelves where her notes used to be. And then the men came. black suits, unmarked cars. They said they were from the Department of Transportation, but they asked the wrong questions. Not about steel or bridges, but about shadows, sightings, names of witnesses. They knocked on doors and left behind silence. Some people never spoke of the bridge again. Others moved. A few vanished entirely from the town's memory, like they were never there. One of them came to my house. He was calm, polite, too polished. Asked if I had experienced any unusual phenomena before the collapse. His eyes were too still, his questions too precise. He asked if I had any drawings, notes, recordings. I told him I didn't know what he meant. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, I burned Rick's journal in the backyard. But even as the pages curled to ash, I felt like I was destroying something sacred. A warning no one had listened to. After that, I stopped talking about it. We all did. The town tried to move on, held a memorial, rebuilt the bridge, cleaned up the headlines. But the people were different. Hollowed out. Careful. Some scars don't show on skin. Years passed. I moved away eventually, like everyone else. Tried to build a life, tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that static again. So faint I wonder if it's real, or just memory's cruel trick. And sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I see red eyes in the corner of the dark. Watching. Not malevolent. Not vengeful. Just waiting. I don't know if it will ever return to Point Pleasant, or if it already has somewhere else. In another town where no one listens, where the river runs deep and the sky is quiet. But I do know this. It was never the villain. It was the witness. And we, the ones who ignored the warnings, who silenced the signs, were always the ones to blame.